you said it, landmark year in the SEC, but also a landmark year for Alabama because they no longer have Nick Saban as their head coach. All right, he's not there. He retired. He's off in the sunset, working for SEC Network, doing awesome things with ESPN for game day. Great. We love that. Okay. Enter Kalen DeBoer, coach from Washington. We're not going to go through all of Kalen DeBoer's resume. If you want to check that out, we have a video on Kalen DeBoer when Alabama hired him. Please go check that out. I'm sure y'all will enjoy that. But yeah, he brings in coaches Nick Sheridan, Kane Womack, Maurice Linguist, some pretty big hires, right? Now, Nick Sheridan, I have some questions about, right, based on his past experience at Indiana when Kalen DeBoer left. However, when Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan were both in the same room at Indiana, they had one of their best offensive seasons in decades. So, but when Kalen DeBoer left, Nick Sheridan by himself, they had perhaps one of the worst offenses that school has ever seen in the 2021 season. So, I do have some questions about Nick Sheridan, but I also trust Kalen DeBoer a lot because he just wins everywhere he stinking goes. So I have zero problem trusting Kalen DeBoer. And honestly, I'm looking at the odds here, and Alabama is fourth in odds to win the SEC this year. They are fourth in odds to win the SEC. In the SEC media polls that just came out, they voted them third in the SEC behind Georgia and Texas. I don't know about you, CD, but I still think this team is pretty talented across the board.
It's crazy to say that Alabama is being slept on, right? But the reality is there's so much change going on there, and I get why maybe it discourages some, bettors in this way and that way, right? I mean, I don't blame me at all. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I do think there's a lot to be certain with the more you mentioned it. Just he's one of those guys that has earned the trust, I think, of college football fans, deservingly so, where he's like, yeah, he's gonna put together good staff. Look at him recruiting right now. Look at the talent. And by the way, Nick Saban, he did a fantastic job of leaving him a ton of talent. I mean, you lose premier guys, Isaiah Bond, Amari Niblack, Caleb Downs, Earl Litter Jr. was going to be one of the better nickels in the country next year. Like those guys are all off the portal, and it doesn't matter. There's still so much talent here. I cannot wait to get into it. For all Alabama fans, you guys got another one. You guys will be just fine. Don't you worry. Yeah.
Recruiting, all those people that were like, yeah, you can't recruit in the Midwest or coming from the Midwest. Yeah, nice try. Nice try with that one,
Just
guy. That was
just
a
pissed
great
them
take that
off.
you had. That was a great take at the that you had at the water cooler over there, telling your buddy, "Oh, we'll see if he can recruit in the SEC." That was an
Yeah.
awesome take that you had, by the way, at your water cooler at work.
Real quick about the
No,
staff here. I know we touched on it earlier in our videos, back in holy cow, January, if you can remember that long. Not so much has happened since then, but on that staff, you mentioned some of those key names, Sheridan Womack. Obviously, trust DeBoer on the offensive side of the football. You lose Grubb and your old line coach out to the NFL, which is kind of crazy and hectic there. But I trust DeBoer and that staff to do just wonders offensively. Defensively, that's what impressed me, right? You get out, you go get Kane Womack and Maurice Lundqvist, two former, or actually current G5 head football coaches who just left their job to become your co-defensive coordinators. And then you also bring in a guy like Colin Hitchler from Cincinnati and Wisconsin and Fickle. Midwest guys know exactly what he produced. NFL guys, have you heard of a guy? Um, Holy cow. Who's the fucking Sauce Gardner? My goodness, I'm so sorry for my language here. Sauce Gardner. Thank you. That's a Colin Hitchler guy. So he's done wonders there. And that's a DB room that maybe is the only question mark, I think, right here. And we'll get into it eventually. But even bringing back Freddie Roach, I mean, the only question I have is kind of interesting is they don't really have a special teams coordinator. I was looking up their roster and then their coaching staff, and it's like, and I know that's not uncommon in college football, but I think it's definitely something of note, and we'll see how it pans out. That's my only concern. But other than that, I do
well,
trust DeBoer, the
I
staff putting together
think
pretty good.
isn't Jay Nunez? He's not the coordinator, but he's like their special teams. He was the special teams coordinator at um what was it?
Washington.
East was it at Washington and then Eastern Michigan before that, something like that. So I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, I know they're also changing some rules about analysts, maybe coaching a little bit more. I don't know when those have come out yet or whatnot, but That I guess so. But also, yeah, they'll be just fine. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
coaching
Having
staff wise, it's one of
analysts,
the best coaching
you
staffs
basically
in.
the only restriction with analysts is that like I think there's practice restrictions in the spring with analysts. I don't know if you can have them on the practice field actually coaching, but rules are changing at least in game, so you're allowed to have analysts on the field for the game. Like you said, that probably has something to do with like a lot of these teams. Maybe not having a special teams coordinator or not rushing it, or maybe making it an effort between several coaches. So I want to talk about the offense then. Um, I mean, Jalen Monroe's the guy, right? That's what it kind of seems
I,
like.
I have nothing to believe otherwise. Now, if he struggles early, we'll see how long the leash is. I do think Ty Simpson, long term Mac, I think they all had good springs. I think that staff feels pretty good about them in the future of this room. I don't know why Matt is laughing right there. But regardless,
I just spit up a bunch of water on me.
geez,
Not because anything you said was funny. I just
can't
spit up
drink.
water.
He's
Yeah,
just too excited right now.
just can't
No, but
drink.
yeah, it's so, but Milroe is a guy. I think a lot of people are assuming it's going to take a step, and how much of a step he takes, I think, could determine how the potential of this team in terms of the postseason, right? I think Milroe, I mean, everyone trusts, I think, that offensive staff, especially DeBoer, to develop Milroe, right? I think at least get him a little bit better than maybe he was in his first year, especially early in that season. But also, I think DeBoer has done a really good job back in the day of using rushing ability of their quarterbacks. I mean, Milroe had, yeah, he threw for 2,800 yards. He had 23 touchdowns, only 6 INTs, and that looks good and all, but he took 44 sacks. But on the ground, no. I mean, 500
Yeah,
plus yards. He had a 53-yard scamper, 12 touchdowns in the red zone. Him, Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, those guys are pretty beefy there, and I think they can do some damage, especially in short yardage.
yeah. I mean, about the rushing yards. I mean, so he had like almost 800 yards rushing, but the 44 sacks. I mean, that was 125th in the country. You're looking at sacks per game metric. That's a Jalen Milroe stat, right? 25% of pressures. They actually might be 27, but it was over a quarter of the pressures that were on Jalen Milroe actually turned into sacks, right? And that is a quarterback stat, right? Like pressures turning into sacks, right? Like Quinn Ewers is a really high rate, but if you want to look at guys that do a good job of getting rid of the ball, Carson Beck does a really good job of getting rid of the ball. Connor Wigwing does a really good job of getting the ball, or good job getting rid of the ball. Like if he can fix that, right, or Kalen DeBoer can find more ways to get Jalen Monroe in rhythm, right, and like maybe in the pocket, then I think you got a good chance to do something really nice there. And I think the offensive line from last year, we thought it was going to be really good, and it struggled early, but it got better as the season went on. I mean, the offensive line gets better, right? I mean, like, there's no reason to believe that it gets worse.
I don't think so. I mean, that interior is about as good as I've seen in college football in a long, long time. I know Proctor's the name in that room, obviously kind of had an eventful offseason, former 5-star guy, and he deserves his flowers as well. He played really, really well in that Georgia game and at the end of the season. But Tyler Booker, Parker Brailsford, who's coming over from Washington, and Jaden Roberts in that interior are absolutely so, so good. Booker and Roberts are massive. They can move people. Brailsford had an unbelievable season as a freshman just a year ago for Joe Moore, a winning line with Washington. Obviously, familiarity with Sheridan, with DeBoer in that system. I think that absolutely helps. He forced a guy like James Brockmeyer, who had a very, very good spring, to transfer over to TCU, and he's going to start there and play pretty well, probably in the Big 12. Right tackle is the only question, but I mean, you've got three high 4 stars that are just waiting in the the ranks there. That I'm sure they'll be just fine. Whether it's
All
Pritchett,
redshirt freshmen and
Formby,
sophomores. That's
yeah,
crazy. They're all young.
Pritchett, Formby, McVay, they're plenty good. I think they can figure it out. I know you got new line coach Chris Kapilovic, right, coming over, I believe from Michigan State. I'm sure they'll organize it to the best five out there, but that interior, man, is scary for a team that's going to run the football. And yes, you lose 2 to 3 backs, right? But holy cow, doesn't it still look like a really, really good room?
It does. I mean, it always does. It always looks like there's depth, right? It just depends. Have they been able to put the pieces together, right? It's not every year that Alabama has an amazing offensive line. For in general, though, they are always a top quarter, top half offensive line. In those special years when they've had lots of draft picks, that's when they really put it together. right? So we're gonna see. Yes, you do have a couple new pieces here, but of course, no JC Latham. But I don't really have a problem losing Latham, to be honest. Do you? I mean,
I mean, experience and I guess size slash talent. He wasn't he was not a below average SEC player at all. He's obviously
no,
drafted
no,
in the first
no.
round by one of the
Yeah.
better O-line coaches, in the NFL at Tennessee. But also, I think he struggled at times in that scheme last year. Not that, you're just going to insert an upgrade over a top 10 pick, but I don't think it's going to be this crazy drop off that you might expect going from an unproven guy or going from a top 10 draft pick to an unproven guy.
All right. Well, let's talk about the people that are going to benefit most besides Jalen Monroe from the offensive line. That's the running back room. Okay. Because when I look at it, it's loaded again. I mean, is Justice Haynes the guy, right? I don't know that he's going to be the absolute alpha in that backfield. I mean, Jam Miller is fantastic. He won spring game MVP honors. You also got Richard Young in there as a redshirt freshman. Kevin Riley coming in there from, I believe he's from the state of Florida, if I'm correct in that, as a true freshman. That running back room is still good. I mean, I think people aren't seeing names that they necessarily recognize, but look, if you followed recruiting, right, you followed Bama message boards and you've followed or even in the Michigan game, Justice Haynes was awesome. Justice Haynes is awesome. He is going to be very good, man. I have a feeling like if they really let him take over, and I don't think they will because Jam Miller is really good, really good running back. I can see both these guys having 700, 800 yards plus for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what Haynes did in that Michigan was kind of reminiscent of back in 2017 when Najee Harris was behind a couple of their pro NFL running backs and Damian Harris, Josh Jake, Josh Jacob, no, Kenyon
No, not Kendrick. Yeah, I think you're
Harris
right. I
and
think it's
I
Harrison
don't know.
Jacobs.
Regardless, though, um, Najee like he kind of took over in that game and like you saw the potential there, and I think he kind of built that into a very successful career at Alabama. I see a similar pack for Haynes, but you mentioned the depth there. I also want to not only the running backs here, but I want to talk about the running game and what they can do with some of these wide receivers before we get to them, going down, pushing the ball down the field. But guys like Kendrick Law, guys like Emmanuel Henderson, right? Even Ryan Williams, you can get them the ball in space. And I think they're going to also add an element to quote unquote rushing game, I guess, or short passing game that can be really, really dynamic for you and really stretch the field, not only vertically, right, as passers, but also horizontally and really open up the field and do things that DeBoer wants to do.
Yeah, and it feels like this offense last year, of course, we saw it got better as the season went on. People are going to argue about the Tommy Rees call against Michigan. Like, honestly, I don't have a problem with putting the ball in the hands of your best player, on the last play of the game. But I mean, they only threw the ball 23 times a game, and that a lot of that's reflective of the beginning of the season and managing certain games, being ahead on the game script. But I have a feeling that they're going to ask Jalen Monroe to do a lot more than they did last year. And that could be a really good thing. If he really does take a step, this team has a chance to be really good. I mean, I am very high in this Alabama. I am higher on this team than I'm not going to say I'm higher on this team than I was last year. Uh, I wasn't, hey, Alabama's going to win the national championship train last year. I was like, hey, let's manage expectations. They exceeded my expectations for sure. But I have a chance. I have a feeling that this team will exceed people's expectations this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball, which is already relatively high expectations because you bring in a guy like Kalen DeBoer who's had so much success on the offensive side of the ball. But I still think that there is a level of expectation that I think is going to be met and or exceeded on the offensive side of the ball. Uh,
Yeah,
so what do you like about Jeremy Bernard?
I think he can be pretty good. Well, first thing I like about him, and we've talked about this with all of our previews, and especially, it's true in the last 2 to 3 years since the transfer portal and the coaching carousel has been so crazy. If you are a staff that leaves one school and goes to another and handpicks guys to follow you, to me, that tells you really good things. Not only did you have a chance to evaluate them out of high school or the portal, in this case, Bernard's coming from Michigan State, you liked them once when you were recruiting him, and then you got to know him and you like him even more to recruit him again. You get a second chance to confirm that your validation was right about taking him in to your original program. That I love. I also think the reports were very, very high. I mean, obviously he sat behind, three legit NFL players, You had Polk, McMillan, obviously the star, Roma Dunze, and he still had what 400 some yards last year. I mean, he was still uber productive as wide receiver four, and I don't know, he's familiar with the system. I think he can be a difference maker for them, and he can kind of step in and be that wide receiver one while you're waiting for some of your younger guys to step up into those roles. I'm looking at Ryan Williams, Caleb Bowden, two five-star freshmen, even Jalen Hale, who I thought was going to take a big step this year, but unfortunately he's hurt, probably going to miss the season. He'll be a guy that's probably a big part of the future of this room here. But Bernard gives you an immediate impact piece, a plus starter at the wide receiver position in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has a chance to be this number one receiver on this team. I don't think there will be like an alpha like there was. I mean, at Washington, there was an alpha, right? As Roma didn't say. Okay, but they also had really good pieces around. I think they're going to, I think they'll spread the ball around a lot. I mean, kind of like what they did last year, with Tommy Reese. Uh, I mean, Burden was a very solid. I guess you could call him a number one. Jermaine Burden. I mean, it kind of like wasn't until that A&M game where he really kind of stepped and filled into those shoes. But I don't know, man. I think the wide receiver room is pretty good. Obviously not as talented as some of the wide receiver rooms that we've seen in Alabama, but you still, it's hard not to be high on this offense still, right? It's still hard not to be high on that.
For losing Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton, Malik Benson, Ja'Cory Brooks, even a guy like Chaz Preston, to
And you're
withstand all that
still,
attrition, and you still can go, six deep with the injury to Jalen Hale. I mean, holy cow. It's a testament to Saban, but it's also a testament to DeBoer and Jamarcus Shepard for keeping that room together and adding a piece like Bernard. And also, like, I know they were kind of almost late to the party, right? In um terms of the transfer portal because they were on the back end of the coaching carousel, but they could have gone out and gotten more pieces if they thought they needed to. And
absolutely.
and I'm sure DeBoer, by the way, got a good look at Alabama when he was scouting Michigan, right? And scouting players like Prentice or Law, and even a guy like Emmanuel Henderson. Like um, I'm sure he knew exactly what he was walking into and felt comfortable not making these overhaul changes.
All right, well, let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. And I think if you ask every beat writer, every fan, I think, as much change as there's going to be on offense and questions about Jalen Monroe taking another step, I think there's a lot more questions on the defensive side of the ball, right? I mean, you lose a lot of production, particularly in that secondary. I mean, you lose Caleb Downs to Ohio State, you lose Terrion Arnold, you lose Kool-Aid McKinstry. Both of those cornerbacks go to the NFL. And believe it or not, I was actually the guy last year that was concerned about the secondary because of the lack of experience and the performance the year prior of Terrion Arnold. Did not expect that kind of leap that he made this year because, watching Terrion Arnold in person, I was impressed with the athleticism, but just didn't feel like he put it together. But he really did last year. So I mean, we'll see. And here's the thing: it's like last year I wasn't high on this secondary, but I don't want to make that same mistake again. I think they still have a very talented set of kids in the secondary. It's just going to be a question like, are they going to be starting a true freshman at that second cornerback spot? Right? So listen to some of these beat writers talk about that. I don't know what's going to go on there at that cornerback two spot, but I guess we'll start on the defensive line. Uh, it's fine. It's good. It's a good defensive line, right? You
Yeah, I
can't
think
argue that.
your strengths are probably your interior and then your at
Correct.
least your talent depth wise at all your other positions. I mean, I don't, your depth talent. All right, I don't think a lot of those guys have a ton of experience, but the talent is absolutely there. Interior, I guess we'll start there. Right, Tim Keenan comes back. He's been a very solid player for you. Tim Smith, I really like him. He's been a very good player for Alabama in the SEC for multiple years now. He steps into a bigger role. Jaheim Otis, he's a guy, holy cow, he can be a game wrecker if he puts it all together on every play. Damon Payne and Jane Smith are just a couple five stars that are sitting in the depth range, but they're also productive players as well. Damon Payne had flashes last year. Smith, they like him in the practice reports as well. A lot of promising things on the interior, which can make some things easier on the outside. You look at the interior, right up the middle of this defense, and we'll get into to Lawson and the linebacker position and your safeties, but those are your strengths. right? It's more the edges here. And I guess I'll let you talk about defensive end and edge for him.
Well, I just think pass rush in general has a potential to be a concern for this team,
Yeah.
right? Which it in all of Saban's years, have they ever had a problem like legitimately getting to the quarterback unless it was a scheme issue with Pete Golding, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's been a
have they
long, probably
I mean,
since 2014, maybe that last year of AJ McCarron. That's it. Since then, you've had Jonathan Allen, Tim Williams, Ryan Anderson. Like you have had a litany of elite pass rushers.
yeah, I mean, and obviously they have talent, right? Like Latham has talent, Quandarius Robinson has talent, but they're not Dallas Turners, right? They're not Will Andersons, right? They're not Courtney Upshaw's, right? Name drop. They're not, from what I've seen, really, really, really good pass rushers, guys that are able to put that kind of pressure on quarterbacks. And look, on their schedule, they have some pretty good quarterbacks, but more importantly, they have young quarterbacks on their schedule.
Yeah.
And if they're not able to get to those quarterbacks, I'm looking at South Carolina with Lenore Sellers. I'm looking at Tennessee with Nico. I'm looking at LSU with Garrett Nussmeier, if you want to call him young, I guess, experience wise. And I'm looking at Jackson Arnold. I mean, I'm looking at those are some big games, right? That you
Three road games too. Three road games as well.
three of those are road games, yes. And I think you need to find a way to put pressure on these quarterbacks. And I don't know if that's going to be something that Kane Womack and Reese Linguist are going to have to be talking about in ways to scheme guys and certain one-on-ones and, getting linebackers involved in the pass rush here. So I do have a little bit of a concern. I don't know if like their run defense will be solid. Okay. And their linebacking core, we can talk about them as well. Deontay Lawson coming back is huge. Huge. I think it was really good. Jahad Campbell, obviously all the talent in the world with that guy at linebacker. So and yeah, you're making that face. That's just like, oh my gosh, Jahad Campbell is doing something for you, obviously. But I think the run game will be fine. I think it's going to be with the questions about the secondary, right? You also have to look at the front seven about their ability to rush the passer.
Well, the upside is banking on former talented recruits who have played either limited or even spotty roles, either in your program or in Texas A&M. Looking at LT Overton, obviously comes over. Those guys need to take a step up. And here's the thing: is I'm enough like if you throw enough 5 stars right in spring and summer and fall workouts, to me, I feel like at some point there's going to be one that emerges, whether it's Jan Zapier, Quay Rousseau, Keon Keeley, former really, really high recruit, and obviously LT Overton. To me, I feel like there's got to be one of them. It has to be one that comes up and elevates right this room. I think you mentioned it. You know exactly what you're getting in a 5th-year player with Quindarius Robinson, right? And with all due respect to him, I really like him. He's a special teams baller. He's a good athlete, but he's been there for 5 years. And to me, that tells me like he hasn't had significant playing time on defense. And I don't think like it's not that he's not good. It's just he doesn't have that next gear that a guy like Dallas Turner, Will Anderson has had up ahead of him, right? And you've same with John Moran, Lathan. I don't know if the upside that you mentioned is there rushing the passer. It's got to be in that depth. Somebody has to take a step up. I mean, I feel good about it happening, but it's hard to bet on young kids, especially in the SEC, that with a new coaching staff. I guess Freddie Roach is coming back, which is nice. He's that D-line coach has been there for a while now. Some familiarity there, but to take that next step, it's going to be those young 5 stars.
Yeah, I think you really need to hit on LT Overton. And now this is a guy, yeah, sure, like the production hasn't been there at A&M, right? But he played 220 snaps last year. And people are forgetting that he was a 5-star that reclassified. So he's actually like a year behind in terms of maturity. Now, that's a guy who is very matured as a physical specimen, right? But I think one more year, and I think A&M staff believes that as well. Like if you had given him one more year, right? Like he would have had a chance to be a real difference maker. I really think Alabama needs LT Overton to kind of take that step and be that college football player that people were expecting LT Overton to be. You were talking a lot about Jahad Campbell, or you made that face. Did you want to talk about him a little bit more?
I mean, he's just what I have written down is just freaky, right? He just is freaky. And by the way, I have that written down on a bunch of players on this Alabama defense, which tells you what I think about the talent there. But he is exactly what you want in an SEC linebacker. He is all of 6'3", 6'4", 230 pounds, moves sideline to sideline. And also like sitting next to a guy that's super, super good, probably the best player on that defense in Deontay Lawson. That gives Jahad Campbell the ability to go and make plays. I love his game. I absolutely love his game. I thought he took a nice step last year, and I think in even a bigger role, right, he's going to take an even greater step. You brought in Trezin Marshall last year to kind of bridge that gap to bring in a reliable linebacker for you. But now you have Lawson returning, and now you have Campbell, who's already gotten, his feet wet and then some in the SEC. Holy cow. And even behind that room, too. I mean, Jeremiah Alexander, I think they're moving to off-ball linebacker. That's a former 5-star. Again, really souped up athlete. And then even Justin Jefferson, that guy just pops. In that spring game last year, he popped, man. He had a couple plays that's just like, whoa, what is he doing blitzing like that? Like, linebackers are not supposed to move like that. And has he put it together consistently down by down? I don't know yet, but he doesn't have to either. Playing behind Lawson and Campbell, you have those guys that are going to play meaningful starter roles for you. But to have Jefferson and Alexander and another true freshman coming in behind them that can give you like specialty roles, whether it's third down, blitzing, spot here and there. That's really exciting.
So let's talk about the secondary now. Look, we've already had a video about Keon Sabb. If you haven't checked it out, check that out. Basically, to sum it up, guy who played at Michigan that probably should have played more and was really good in the time that he played is young, talented, effective in whatever position that you want to play him at, right? And he's coming over there from the national championship defense to play uh in that secondary for Alabama. So it's Keon Sabb, right? Malachi Moore, right? Do we know he's been there? I mean, forever. I mean, I remember watching him as a true freshman dominate A&M in the red zone there on that interception. So I remember him like all the way from that COVID year, right? He just returns experience, instincts. He's a good football player, all right? Damani Jackson is transferred from USC that I think Alabama beat writers, Alabama fans, that staff are really going to have to rely on that outside cornerback spot to, I don't say take a step up, but yeah, he needs to be really good. This is a different level of athlete that he's dealing with. I think he's really good. I think he's really talented. Again, he was a highly rated recruit, 5-star coming out of high school as a true junior. I mean, he's got to play really well. I mean, like, you are losing significant production at that cornerback spot. Is Damani Jackson as good as Terry Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry? I don't believe so yet. All right, and I have no reason to believe that. They need to get something out of Damani Jackson. Did I say Damani Richards? I meant Damani Jackson.
The minor Richardson. No, I'm with you here on Jackson. I think you brought him in, and Saban brought him in before you had the exodus of your cornerback portal like you did. I think you're thinking about a guy like Trey Amos would be a really nice piece to have in that room. Antonio Kite's going to do some nice things for Auburn this year and beyond. Des Ricks over at A&M, impressing staff there. And obviously you mentioned the two NFL guys, and Kool-Aid and Terran Arnold. Jackson was more of a luxury, not necessarily a necessity. And now with all the changes there, he is a necessity. And at least you have a floor of a guy that's played a good amount of Power 5 football. But the reality is, like you said, yeah, this is different. You're going to play guys like Deion Burks at Oklahoma. You're going to play LSU's crazy core. You're going to play Luther Burden in Missouri. Georgia's got a litany of wide receivers. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. You're going to need those guys to cover and cover consistently. Although I do think he isn't a tremendous athlete. He is 6'1", 190 plus, right? He runs low 10 5s, right? 100-yard dash back in high school. He can do it. He can absolutely do it. And I think it's similar to what you were talking about, like a guy like L.T. Overton is like, we saw 2 years of playing time and you saw flashes here and there, but he didn't quite put it together consistently down to down. I think both those teams, USC and A&M, were relying on those guys to take a step up this year. And year 3, hopefully Alabama's a team, if you're an Alabama fan, that's able to reap the benefits of those guys' hard work the past couple of years. But that's why you're bringing a guy like Deshaun Jones. I think he elevates the floor of that room significantly, right? He's a guy from Wake Forest. He's a redshirt junior, 2-year starter in the ACC. And while is he, the upside of Jackson or your 5-star freshman, not necessarily though, but he gives you a reliable piece where you don't have to trot out a 5-star freshman every single week in the SEC. You have a guy like Jackson and Jones that have playing time, and you can rely on those guys. And then once Brown and Mbakwe, even Jaleel Hurley, they're ready to go, then you can rip them and let it loose.
Yeah, I was listening to some beat writers today, and there is a concern though, like you are going to have to at some point play true freshmen in that secondary. It's going to happen. So uh, hopefully they're ready. It is all I'm going to say about this team. I really hope they're ready. So, but you were going to say something?
I would say it would be fun to see. So Damani Jackson from Mater Dei, right? And so Xavier Brown. It'd be fun to see two Mater Dei corners from California starting in the SEC at Alabama. It's kind of crazy how national recruiting is, how they've done well with Mater Dei kids, right? We know what Bryce
Yeah.
Young did, and whatnot. But yeah, Brown and Mbakwe, those are the 5-star studs.
Or
We'll
how
see.
state income tax affects the transfer portal and
Yeah,
recruiting.
exactly. Exactly. That's
So,
not ridiculous at all.
case
Hey,
study.
Brown was a guy that, I mean, he was obviously a talented recruit for a while, but he really shot up in a similar way that Bryce Young did, not quite to the extent. Bryce Young ended up as like the top 2 player in his class, but Brown, yeah, I think they feel pretty good, at least about the long-term future of those guys. But like you said, yeah, they're gonna have to play significant snaps, regardless, even if Jackson and Jones hit. But I don't know.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about the schedule, okay? Because I think in some ways
Wait,
they
wait,
were given some
real
fame.
quick. So before we move on, can we talk about the safety room real quick? I know you mentioned it.
Oh,
I
okay,
just want
yeah,
to
yeah.
say I want to say how much I think this room you can do a lot of things moving guys around. Keon Sabb played a lot of different positions. Malachi Moore, they moved around. Devonta Smith has nickel and safety versatility. Even a guy like Red Morgan can come in. King Maxa is
Another
the
true
transfer
freshman.
from Penn State. Yeah, Red Morgan's a baller. The King Maxa, high recruit from Penn State, that they were pretty high on his development there at Penn State. Comes down to Alabama. And then I guess you got a guy like Cameron Howard. That's a nice, I'd say just a depth piece from Charlotte. And then Xavier Mincy, Bray Hubbard, former high recruits as well. But yeah, I mean, that safety room, you mentioned Caleb Downs, Jalen Key, Christian Story, Jake Pope. Those are all guys that either contributed last year in Key's sense, but also guys that were going to be relied upon this year. And they're going to be, Downs and Story are going to be starters that can, Ohio State, Kentucky, and Pope's can be battling in a loaded secondary at Georgia as well. So it's just, to me, it speaks to I think I don't want to understate the impressiveness, I guess. Is that a word? It's pretty impressive how they have battled and how they've recruited, that they can lose all these talented guys and still be able to trot out a maybe unexperienced, but still really, really talented group with a good coaching staff.
Agreed. Now I'll move over to the schedule. I think in some ways they were done some favors, in some ways they weren't, right? Playing Georgia, getting them at home is a big deal, right? That is a big deal. Okay. I think having to go to Neyland, you lost the last time you were there, right? Going to LSU, you lost the last time you were there, right? Um, Oklahoma. I'll just run down this full schedule. Western Kentucky at home, South Florida at home, who you struggled with last year.
But
It's
it was in Tampa. It was in Tampa.
you're right,
Okay.
you're right, you're right.
Now it's back in, home territory. Brian Denny, much, much better. But by the way, and USF's probably not going to beat Alabama, but they're going to test that secondary. Am I right?
Yeah, we'll get a good gauge.
Yeah.
We'll get a good gauge. We'll also get a good gauge week 3, Tyler Van Dyke in Wisconsin.
There we
Having to go
go.
to there. Then you get a bye week after that, right before Georgia, which is huge, by the way, huge. Great scheduling dynamic there for the Crimson Tide. Then you get Vanderbilt on the road, South Carolina at home, Tennessee on the road, like I said, tough game. Missouri at home, who is, by the way, going to test that secondary for sure. So hopefully your secondary's, hopefully your secondary is fixed by the Georgia week, right? But if it isn't fixed by Tennessee or Missouri, you're certainly going to get tested there. Then a bye, and then LSU, another week where your secondary is going to get tested. Um, that, of course, is in Death Valley. Then Mercer at home, at Oklahoma, over there in Norman. And then you get Auburn at home, which, by the way, big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal. In a transition year, Kalen DeBoer getting Auburn at home is a big deal. Because if you are in your first year as the head coach at Alabama and you lose to Auburn, like there's a different kind of there's some pressure to that for sure. That is a game that you have to win in your first year as the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide.
That stink does not go away, right? For Bama fans, if you lose to Auburn, I mean, you've seen, and even Bama has had really good coaches fired because they couldn't beat Auburn, and that's the beauty of college football and rivalries. But like you said, yeah, there's some of the scheduling dynamics in terms of home and away. like Georgia, like Auburn, even Missouri, right? That's kind of nice to be at home. But the reality of, and it showed here, like this is the SEC this year, and you're gonna get tough road games. You mentioned them in Tennessee, LSU, Oklahoma, and then even Wisconsin in the out of conference. It's a tough schedule for Alabama, right? But you don't get Texas, right, which is nice. You don't get Ole Miss, which is nice. You don't get Texas A&M, which is nice. But you're also not getting Mississippi State, you're not getting Arkansas, you're not getting, I guess, Florida / Kentucky. Like you're not getting teams that you would typically handle, right, in this year at least. But yeah,
Uh, that being said, their over win total is 9.5. Very big, largely juiced to the under, by the way. Minus 142 on FanDuel to the under. I can't help but see value when I see it. I mean, over 9.5 at plus 116. I mean,
yeah.
that's the pick for me. I mean, this team is good enough to win double-digit games. Absolutely. And scheduling dynamic with Georgia, right, is a big deal. I think going to Neyland is tough, but I worry about their pass rush, right? Like that is a big deal. They're not going to be able to get to LSU's quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier. Tennessee also has a really good offensive line. That is my biggest concern, right? But I
Georgia does
think
too, yeah.
Georgia does too. So if they lose to Georgia, I think they can split Tennessee, LSU, and I think they can handle Missouri at home. Especially if Missouri's defense is looking the way that it is. And then I don't see them having a problem with Auburn at home. Obviously if it's in Jordan Hare, it's a different story. But in Oklahoma, I think this is a 10-win team, man. I think this team at 10 wins, I think they make the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. With the schedule and the SEC, absolutely. And it's also Alabama. I mean, regardless. So a couple of the points I want to point out too is to me that stretch in week 7, week 8, week 9 is South Carolina at Tennessee and Missouri. And South Carolina doesn't necessarily scare me in terms of, matchup problems because North Sellers in year 1, some of the receivers they have, like, yes, I'm like Sam Brown, but regardless, they're going to run the football a lot. And
Jared
I feel
Jared
like
Brown, Jared Brown, Jared Brown.
Jared Brown, thank you. Sam Brown's at Miami. Uh, Regardless, they're going to run the football. And with your front seven, right, I feel pretty good about that stopping the run there and being able, to take advantage of maybe South Carolina's second level. But you're going to get beat up in that game. And that is 2 weeks after playing Georgia. Now, yes, you get Vanny in between there. Regardless, though, that's a long stretch before your bye week, right? At Tennessee, Missouri, those are teams that can take advantage of your secondary if it doesn't work out. Now, I do think it does help that it's not in week 4, week 5, right? You have time to figure it out. And Georgia's probably going to expose some vulnerabilities, which is fine. I mean, you're going to have to get those cleaned up. Even if you lose that game, you could still accomplish all of your goals. Maybe not. Yeah, you can still accomplish all of your goals in the SEC and beyond with that. And but also say Oklahoma at the end, week 13. Like to me, this is a team that they could probably. I wouldn't be surprised if they're 10-1 coming into that game, or 9-1, whatever it may be, and you lose because Jackson Arnold's had 10 games to get ready for that game. Norman's going to be on fire. Maybe you're overlooking them for Auburn. I just think a lot of games you could lose here. But with that being said, I'm going the over as well. I just feel really good about the
Yeah.
staff. I think the talent is there. I think the floor with the way you can run the football with your line, the way you could stop the run with your defense. To me, I love that, and I think they're going to figure some things out. That coaching staff is too good not to cover some holes.